This is part 12, installing WordPress. So I'm going to try to be quick but in depth, and I'm also going to explain everything that I'm doing in the process. So to get started with installing WordPress, by default, or not by default, but from the last videos that I recorded, I've kept my database, my FTP, and my email text documents open on the right side of my screen. We can now go ahead and close the email text document. If you followed along with the FTP setup, you should already have the FTP account or accounts set up in your FileZilla software, so we can close this. If you don't have an FTP setup, go ahead and watch one of the previous videos on how to set up your FTP account. But we want to keep our database notepad open. So the first thing we want to do is open our folder structure, and in this folder structure we have one folder titled WordPress. In WordPress folder we should have a folder that we renamed. By default it's titled your website name. Here you should rename that to your website name in all lowercase letters, no spaces. You want to open that folder, and if you followed the previous videos, you should have WordPress files in this folder. But if you don't, let me show you how to download those. So you have WordPress.com and you have WordPress.org. WordPress.com is not a self-hosted WordPress website. You do not have creative freedom or administrative freedom as far as installing whatever plugins and themes that you want, expanding features, allowing membership registrations. WordPress.com, signing up for an account is something similar to signing up for a Twitter, for a blogger, for a Tumblr, for a Facebook. You don't have control over just any and everything. A self-hosted WordPress website, on the other hand, gives you total access, administrative and creative freedom over what you want to do with the website 100%. So you will find that at WordPress.org. I know there's been a lot of confusion as to where people go, and they sign up for WordPress.com thinking that they can now install all these custom themes and plugins, when in reality they don't have a self-hosted WordPress website. So because it's not self-hosted by you and self-managed by you, WordPress.com gives you they basically limit your ability to do rich, content rich and visual rich, memory rich like features. Some of these features take up a lot of RAM, a lot of space, so they don't want you to be able to have the ability to install custom plugins and themes and visuals. So you want to go to WordPress.org, click on this blue button at the top right hand corner. It says download WordPress, and there's another blue button you want to click on, or you can right click or command click if you're on a Mac and save this link as. It should open up a save as window where you can save a zipped file or an archive. And you want to navigate to the folder structure that we downloaded, our WordPress folder and our website folder, and save the zip file here. You should also have installed Sublime Text and any type of unarchiver or 7-zip if you need to unzip this file. So when you download it, you can show this in the folder. Let me go ahead and close this tab and minimize my browser. You'll have a WordPress zipped file, which you can right click and extract here or unarchive if you're on a Mac. And now you can delete the zipped file. We're going to open up this WordPress folder that is extracted. We're going to grab all of the contents that were in this folder. You can right click and cut, or you can command or control X to cut, or you can go to home and cut. And then you can go back up one level, okay, where that WordPress folder was extracted, and we're going to control V as in Victor or paste. Now we can delete this WordPress folder because it's going to be empty and useless. By default, we have a WordPress, we have PHP files, an HTML file, a text file, and 3 directories: WordPress admin, WordPress content, WordPress includes. If you're on Windows, you can go to view and you can choose whether or not you want to view file name extensions. It's not necessary. But if you do view file name extensions, if you go back and rename one of these files, which I don't recommend unless you know what you're doing, you want to make sure you append the .php or the file name extension to the name of that file when you are saving it. If you've installed Sublime Text, then Sublime Text may be your default text editor for PHP files. If you've already gone through the install process, which I will assume that you have. Otherwise, you can right click on one of the PHP files, click open with, and choose your default program. So this WP config sample file is the file we need to edit. I'm actually going to go over to home or file. We're going to choose this file, copy it, and paste it so we can have a copy of that file here. I'm going to change this name from copy to backup or original. We may not ever need this file, but this is just in case. And we're going to go over to find the WP config sample, the actual original document. And we're going to delete the word sample and the dash at the end, leaving our title of this file wp-config. And if you have extension showing, it'll say .php. Now we can double click this file and open it with Sublime Text. This is what it will look like. It'll be color coded. Any gray text is just a note or a description of a feature or a particular section of the document. Generally, what we are going to edit will be in blue, white, or yellow. And I'm going to just bring this window over a little bit so that I can see my database text document. What we want to do is copy our database name with no space before or after the database name. And inside of our WP config PHP document, we want to paste that database name right where it says database underscore name underscore here. And we want to paste this in the quotations, but we don't want to leave additional space between our database name and the quotations. So we want to go and grab our host name. So localhost is the text that will be replaced. We'll grab our username, and username underscore here is the text that will be replaced. And of course, whatever your password was when you set up your database, which you should have recorded in this text document, you want to paste that here. Now it's case sensitive, along with the database username, the database name, the database host. It's all case sensitive, so make sure you just copy and paste everything. We're going to scroll down a bit, and we're going to find this @link text in pink. And after this @link text, there will be a space and a URL that you need to select and copy. So it'll say https://API blah blah blah, ending in salt /. We don't want to also select wordpress.org. So just the salt and /. We want to copy this URL. We'll open our browser, open a new tab, and paste that URL in the address bar and hit enter. It's going to generate a API authority key or authorization. And this API, you want to copy all of this text, so you can hit Command or Control A to select all the text and Control C to copy it. Now this key is going to be different every time this page is generated. There is a unique key for every page. No two keys are the same. Okay, so once you've copied that text, you can minimize your window, go back to your WordPress config file in Sublime Text. We're going to grab line 49 the text starting with define and the text ending on line 56 with the semicolon. And we're going to hit Control P, or I'm sorry, V as in Victor, to paste, which will replace the highlighted text. Okay, so let me undo that and show you what I did. I copied all this text from define to the last semicolon, Control V as in Victor to paste our API code. So now in our browser, we can close this tab and minimize the browser. Let's scroll down a bit more to line 66 where it shows $table underscore prefix. Between the P and the underscore, we want to maybe add the abbreviation of our website name, for example. And this is just going to create a unique database, different from the default, specifically for our website. The last thing you want to do is go down to line 90, place your cursor on line 90 and click it. There's an empty line of text here that we're going to just hit backspace and delete. So the last line should be line 89 ending with the semicolon. We're going to hit File, Save. And assuming that you've entered your password, which I'm going to do now, you can now close that tab and then close Sublime Text. So close the tab. If you don't close the tab before closing Sublime Text, the next time you open Sublime Text, that will be the default tab that shows up because you didn't close the tab in your last session. Now, there are a few ways that you can actually transfer these files to your server. All of these files must go in the same folder that you created, that you linked your domain name to, right? So we want to open, let's say we want to use our control panel. If you go to oneandone.com, you will go down to, if you're on your home page, you'll go down to the hosting box or the hosting section and click on Web Space Explorer. And you'll have the option now to go inside of your website folder and let's see, there's this computer monitor or laptop looking screen with a up arrow. This allows you to upload a file. So if you're using Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, sometimes these upload features might not work or they might take a second. You can choose your file. You want to go down to your folder structure, click on WordPress, there goes detailing, and it doesn't look like you can select all the files that you need to transfer over. So you would have to zip all of these files up into a zip or a compressed archive and upload the entire archive. So let me close this. Let me go to my folder. We're going to have all of these files selected. Right click them, send to compressed zipped folder. Okay, so now it doesn't matter what the folder, the zip name is. We're gonna go back to our upload and choose our file. WordPress. I'm gonna choose that zipped file and we're gonna click OK. So if this file is actually any more than 20 megabytes, you will not be able to upload it. So I'm going to show you a couple of other ways you can upload this file. I actually might upload this file 2 or 3 times just to show you the different ways it can be uploaded. This way seems to take a little bit longer, but I'm going to let this process finish. I'll minimize my folder. We can actually close this database text document now, and it's still loading. So this just shows you that this file, this way, kind of takes a little bit longer. I'm actually going to open up my folder structure. I'm going to minimize my browser. I'm going to rename. Actually, let me just duplicate it just for the purposes of this tutorial. And this is just a copy of the README zipped folder. I'm going to actually open up FileZilla. So if you watched the previous videos, you should have File Site Manager. You should have your website set up in Site Manager. If you use the default FTP settings, you'll have access to the root, which means you'll have access to this folder for your website, which is where your domain name is connected to. We're going to double click that, and it shows that that file is not in there yet. So I'm going to go ahead and copy over this second copy that I made. So if you want to do it this way instead, as an alternative method, you can come and copy this folder from your documents over to your FTP account. So of course you can go to File, Site Manager, and set up that FTP account. If you haven't, just go back to the FTP setup video. But once you're connected, you'll have access to that folder, and you want to drop this file inside of your folder structure. It says queued files 1. It looks like it's transferring extremely fast from here. Now successful transfers 1. So about the same time it took for me to actually transfer the wow, I don't even think that this first README, this first file is finished transferring. So it looks like the copy that we just transferred through FTP finished way faster and completely, while this one is still transferring, because you see the difference in files and file sizes. So this one must still be transferring. Let's refresh it and see. Okay, now it's completely transferred. So it transferred almost 30 times faster through FTP. So now we have 2 of the same files in here. Okay, so let me minimize my folder. I hope I'm not confusing you. If we're in one-in-one control panel, which it takes longer to upload files through our web browser, we should now see our file here. In my case, it's 2. If you're in FileZilla, you should also see those 2 files. I'll go ahead and delete one of them. And I'll refresh my web browser. So eventually you're going to have to come over to your web browser anyways if you transfer over the zipped archive, which is this. Alternatively, let me delete these 2 zipped archives out of my folders now that I don't need them. You can transfer all the files individually, and which will take a little bit longer, but you don't have to zip them. So if you're having a hard time zipping these files, you can transfer them. I'm just going to transfer 3. You can transfer them individually. Boom, boom, boom. So queued files 0, failed transfers 0, successful transfers 4. So these 3 files plus that 1 zipped archive we transfer. I'm going to delete these now. So that's 3 ways that you can transfer files over to your server. Make sure they're inside of your folder that you're using for your website installation of WordPress. Okay, so now if you did zip up this entire archive of files, you can delete the zipped folder once it's transferred to your website, just to reserve space on your computer. You eventually do have to log into one-in-one and go to, of course, it's Home and Web Space Explorer. You want to click on your folder and click on the zipped file that you transferred, and we're going to click this green arrow that's pointed up and to the left with a compressor tool, this icon. We're going to unzip this folder here. It's going to ask you where you want to unzip the folder. We're going to choose our folder that's linked to our domain name and click OK. So we should have all of our files and our zipped archive. Let me go back to FileZilla and refresh. We now have all of our files and our zipped archive, which we can delete either in here or via our one-in-one control panel. Let me refresh this again just to show you how it updates from both sides. Now our zipped file is no longer here. So we should have our wp-config.php file and the rest of our WordPress files. By default, these permissions are going to be set to 705 and 666. I don't know what 666 means, but it's definitely satanic. Just kidding. But one thing that I want to touch on now is folder permissions. So by default, your folder permissions will generally be set to 755. I believe that they are set to 755 by default, so, or 705. So actually, let me go over to this WP admin folder in our FTP account. I'm going to right click it and click on file permissions. So by default, it's set to owner permissions. The owner can read, write, and execute, which means I can save files here. I can access the files and manipulate them. Groups cannot read, write, or execute, and the public can read and execute. They cannot write files. So this by default 705 is what you want your permissions to be set to. 705 is the numeric value for these options. 666 is the public can read and write. So you'd want this to be you want to leave this as default if you have if you give your users the option to create a profile, to upload pictures, that kind of thing. Don't manipulate this if you don't know what any of this means. But for future reference, if you see anything that references file permissions, this is where you find them, is in FileZilla. You can right click the files or the folders to view the file permissions. Okay, now I should be able to close FileZilla. I'll go over to my web browser. Okay, I'm going to open up a new tab. So just to recap what we just did, we just downloaded WordPress, changed the configuration of the wp-config file to match our database settings that we created when we set up our database. So we linked that database content to our wp-config file. We uploaded all of our WordPress files into the folder that's associated with our domain name, okay, which is also in a previous video if you don't know how to do that, if you haven't done that yet. Now we have WordPress installed inside of a particular folder for the domain that we have registered with an SSL certificate. So what you want to do now is visit your domain. You will be greeted with a installation prompt. So it says install WordPress, choose your default language. Obviously, if you're not in an English speaking country, or if you are installing a website that's not necessarily going to be in English by default, you would select your language. So we're just going to hit continue, assuming that everything is in English. We're going to change our site title. Okay, so the site title by default, you should have an idea of what that is. Of course, you want to include any keywords that are specific to the site title. So for us, I'm going to do Third Coast mobile detailing, Texas. Okay, so we want to add, I'm going to add Texas in here since this is an actual service in Texas. I generally add the city too, but we're going to deal with the rest of that later. So you can just put something generic in here that you can always go and change this later. My username is going to be my first and last name with the capital letter in the beginning. This is my default username. I'm going to hide the password. I'm going to use my own password. So if you're setting this WordPress up for a client, you want to use your own name as a username and your own password. You can always set their user account up later as an admin, an editor, or whatever it might be. I'm going to use my own email. And I will click on Install WordPress. And now we should be greeted with our WordPress dashboard. The next video will be on how to change the default WordPress settings and set up the default settings in WordPress.